evening. Welcome to Table Talk. In the last few days, there's been a surfeit of information on the new variant Omicron. Really, what is the reality? How much should we be worried? Should we panic? Should we not panic? What is really the information that's come out at this point? Stay with me as Dr. Anupam Sibal, the Group Medical Director of Apollo Hospitals, joins me to answer the questions, the information that is available at this point. But there is, of course, certainly stuff that we can take care of. Anyway, waiting for information to come filter out or waiting for clarity, there's definitely stuff that we can, the COVID appropriate behavior. Good evening, Dr. Sibal.
Hi, good evening, Jyotsna.
Thank you for joining me. It seems that we will always keep connecting in times of uncertainty and not go beyond to like the good times. Every time I think we will talk about the weather someday, but
which hasn't been particularly great with the pollution in Delhi anyway.
Anyway, so forget that as well. But for now, thanks so much for taking the time out. I know suddenly, there's you're much in demand, and I'm very grateful you could take out this half an hour. So a quick introduction, like I said, Dr. Anupam Sibal, very well-known pediatrician, but also the Group Medical Director of Apollo Hospitals. He's joining us today to shed the light that whatever he has, the kind of information that is coming to the medical fraternity for now, and whether we should be worried or not. So, Doc, I'm going right to the start of it. There's a little bit of contradictory information coming. The doctor who alerted to the variant in South Africa says that that the infection is very mild and only those under 30 are kind of getting it. On the other hand, we have WHO, which is going on to say that there's a very high risk and it is a variant of concern. So how do we balance that
out? Pleasure being on your show, Jyotsna. So let's start with the basics. Let's demystify this. So we know that viruses mutate. This virus is going to be no different. All of us are familiar with the flu vaccine that mutates, and based on the dominant virus that is circulating, the WHO decides which particular vaccine is to be designed and become available for the year. And this is a cycle that's been going on for years.
Right.
The SARS-CoV-2 virus is also going to mutate. It has mutated. And every time it mutates, doesn't really bother us. It's only when the mutations are of significance. And that's where, when they are significant, you start calling it a variant. Now, variants could be variants of interest, or there could be variants of concern. So when the WHO uses the term variants of concern, it does so based on certain set criteria. It's more infectious, more transmissible. It has a clinical course which is different to what the conventional or the dominant SARS-CoV-2 virus is doing at that point in time, which means it could be more severe infection. It could result in more hospitalization, ICU care, or sadly death. Or it behaves in a manner different to the dominant strain again in terms of reacting to the treatment. And you know that we have a few treatment options now. Or the variant is smart enough to dodge the vaccine. So when you have these, one or more, the WHO says variants of concern. Now, we've had a few variants of concern over the 19-20 months that we've been grappling with this virus. And of course, the Delta variant became the dominant variant and is the dominant variant in the world. Now, the reason why the WHO decided to classify this into a variant of concern relatively quickly was because they found that in South Africa, the numbers started to increase. Having said that, the absolute numbers are still very low. I mean, if you compare with the UK or the US, the numbers are very low. But the numbers suddenly started to increase. This virus had been isolated, the genomic structure had been identified, and that's what led WHO to classify this as a variant of concern. Now, coming to the question that you raised about the dichotomy, there is no dichotomy. Yes, we know that it is more transmissible. We don't know what the clinical features are because, as we all know, the incubation period, and then, if you're going to run into trouble, typically after you get the symptoms, you were to run into trouble day 7, day 8. We haven't really reached that for the vast majority of individuals who've been infected. Should they need hospitalization or not? We don't know. Will they need ICU care? We don't know. Hopefully, it won't have serious impact on mortality. Similarly, what happens in the vaccinated population? Do they get an even milder version, even with the Omicron? We don't know. We'll get to know this in the coming weeks. But there's some basic information, and I want to share that because I think it'll be reassuring. Because I think in the last 48 to 72 hours, the discourse has been, oh my God,
Yes.
there we go again. After vaccination, after COVID avoidance behavior, after being away from each other with the distancing and the masking and the hand washing and the sanitation, and here we go. We thought we were going to forget about this virus. So let's look back at some of the real world data. So I'll go to earlier on in this year, and the vaccination started in India in January. And we at Apollo vaccinated about 28,000 plus healthcare workers. We vaccinated about 5.1 million people, but 28,000 plus healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, technicians, so on and so forth, come to hospital every day. And we followed these individuals. The vast majority got Covishield, but a significant number also got Covaxin. And we looked for breakthrough infection. So if you've had 2 vaccines, do you still get infection? Well, 5% got infected. But the great news, hardly anyone got admitted, and you could count on fingertips the ones who actually needed ICU, and no one died. So when the Delta variant was all over the place and there were lots of people who were getting infected, the vaccination and the vaccinated population were protected. Now, as vaccination numbers have increased considerably, and we in India need to feel the sense of pride that we've actually administered 123 crore vaccines. That's huge. We are averaging about 7 million a day if you look at the last week or so. So there is protection. And yes, the vast majority of the population hasn't had 2 doses, but among the eligible population, the vast majority has now had 1 dose, and we know that even 1 dose provides protection. So for those who have the vaccine, should this variant make it to the country, they do need to realize that they have protection. And we don't at this point in time know how this variant is going to react to the vaccine. So there's no need to panic. There's no need to, oh my God, how are we going to manage hospitalization? I don't even know if you're going to need hospitalization. We're going to get really sick. Well, if you're vaccinated, perhaps it's going to behave very differently in the vaccinated population. And in the coming few weeks, we'll get to know.
Yeah, but perhaps we're in panic mode simply because I think the second wave we didn't react for a very long time. I think this is a reaction to that. What do you think?
Well, definitely. I think the level of awareness that we have about this virus has increased tremendously. But also, let us not forget that there were huge learnings. So, in some ways, the greater degree of awareness, the fact that we are even having this discussion, the fact that the narrative is now shifting again to, hey, what can I do to protect myself,
Yeah.
is good, because we do know that this virus does have the ability to infect and go across borders pretty quickly. So I think all the learnings that we've had from the second wave will be very useful. I think the fact that we are talking about it, the fact that the level of awareness has increased, the fact that each one of us is thinking about what can I do for myself, my family, is good. And I tell you, this is what we can do. The parties had started, and of course, we had the festivals, and life is coming back to a normal. I'm afraid we can't let our guard down. So, well, if there is a wedding going on, and I know it's so hard to plan a wedding and to make changes last minute, well, just see if you can minimize exposure. I mean, you don't have to be unmasked at times other than when you're eating. Of
Yeah.
course, there are rules and regulations in place in terms of the size of the gathering, which I think we all have to respect. Hand washing, I think, is something that people have got used to. Keep the sanitizer with you when you're outside, wash hands frequently, and please wear a mask properly. And I know the ladies love the colored masks and what have you, but they really need to be tightly clipped on the nose, otherwise they're useless. So I mean, of course, I'm not even talking about masks below the nose, but even when they're on the nose, they need to be clipped. And all the masks do have clips. So I think masking is extremely important. And if you know someone who's not had a vaccine, please tell him to get it now. If there was a reason to get it today, it's now. What are you waiting for? And if you're waiting for your second dose, please go ahead and get it.
Yeah, I was going to come to vaccine and I was going to come to children, but I see already there are a couple of questions. But first, I want to say, you were mentioning about the vaccine and we've got a huge number of population, at least with the first dose. But doc, actually, it just translates to about 31%, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That's still a
sure, but
huge.
I agree. But you have to look at the size of our population. You also have to look at the logistics. I think we've done really remarkably well in terms of reaching the population that we have, and there are always going to be people who are going to say, "Oh no, I don't really need it," and I'm going to be fine. And the fact that we are running at about 9,000 cases per day, which is pretty low for a country of 1.34 billion, people believe, hey, listen, I don't need it. I mean, I think,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
virus is on its way out. So I
yeah.
think we need to convince people that they need to get vaccinated. We have no shortage of vaccines. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
We can easily vaccinate a crore people a day without a problem.
So why are we
So
not vaccinating our children,
because
doc?
because bec- so coming to children now, so that's a very important point. And as a pediatrician, I'm asked this every day. Parents are very concerned. Schools are opening. What should I do? My kid is in class 10. My kid in class 12. My kid was homebound for 2 years, starting play school. What do I do? So you see, it has to be the vaccine strategy for a country is based on several factors. So who's more at risk? Obviously, adults are more at risk. The approval in terms, and of course, the pediatric vaccine, Covaxin, still hasn't been approved. It has been recommended for approval by the expert committee. It does have to go through the motions because if we rush it, then there's criticism saying, what was the rush? Now, when it's taking a bit of time, then everybody's getting anxious. Why is the vaccine not becoming available? So, one, it has to go through approvals. Children are not miniature adults. So you have to study it adequately in children, and those studies have now been performed phase one, phase two, phase three. And it's not easy to do these studies in children. How many parents would want to volunteer their child for a trial? Let's not ignore that fact. Children don't give consent. Their parents have to take the responsibility for doing a trial. So it's not easy to do pediatric trials for vaccines, and in particular for a vaccine against this virus where there's so much hype. So once we've addressed the vast majority of the population that's at risk, which is all adults have got one dose and significant numbers have got second dose, the government will start vaccination in kids who are at higher risk than healthy kids. Now, can't ignore the fact that they're children with cancer, they're children who are on steroids, they're children, on immunosuppressive drugs. I mean, I have so many children who we've performed liver transplants in who need a transplant, the kidney transplant children, children with bone marrow transplants, chronic neurological disease, kidney disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and they are priority number one for us for vaccination. And after that, you come on to vaccinating healthy kids. So it's going to be like what happened with adults, high risk adults, elderly adults, then it came down to less than 45, and then it came down to 18 and above. So that's the sequence that will be followed. I believe that it won't be very long before the permissions come through for children, but for healthy kids, it's going to be a bit of a wait. Should school reopening be linked to vaccination? Well, you're going to miss out on the remaining 4 months if we follow that. And, given the fact that we do produce 25 million babies a year, by the time all the kids get vaccinated, we're going to be well into the new academic year. So you can't really link vaccination with opening of schools. You open schools in an area where the transmission is low, where you don't have outbreaks, do is just not practical. So I think the older kids going to school makes a lot of sense. If the child has an underlying um, condition, has some other disease, you need to have this discussion with your pediatrician and think about starting school. For the younger kids, really up to the parents to decide. And if they choose not to send kids, that's perfectly fine. If they choose to send their kids, that's also perfectly fine. If kids get an infection, kids really respond very well. And you know, we at Apollo have treated more than 220,000 individuals with COVID, and we saw thousands and thousands of kids across the country who did get COVID. Because let me burst this myth that kids did not get COVID. About 11% of individuals who got COVID in our country were less than 20. So a lot of kids did get it, but very few required hospitalization, hardly any went into ICU. So the body of a child responds very differently to that of an adult, which is great news if you're a parent. And this whole thing of MISC, and there were so many sessions that we also had to run. Yes, it happens in less than 1%. And yes, it's a serious condition, but it's less than 1%, and we know how to manage it. So I think, and that is the reason why vaccinations with children is always lower priority. And even now, if you see um, the amount of vaccination in children across the globe, even in the West, where vaccination in children has started, the numbers are much, much, much lower than they were when adult vaccination started, because parents say, okay, even if my kid were to get it, it's going to be mild, and I really want to be sure about has this vaccine been tested enough, and I want some real world experience. And the experience that we are getting now is that this vaccine works in children and it's safe.
So I'm going to throw a very widely flung question, as they would say, or you would think. Why don't we think about getting Pfizer for children? I mean, the CDC has cleared it. Children under 12 are getting it in the US. Why is that not ever come into our thought process? For the simple reason that we are almost 2 years down from the pandemic. And, we can keep saying that they are going to get, they're not going to get it as badly as the adults do, but some children do. And I mean, at the end of the day, families are desperately looking to secure their children.
No, I think the question that kids need to be vaccinated, there's no doubt about that. And all of us have been saying that they do. It's just a question of their slightly lower priority than adults. And there's no dispute in that. It's scientific. But yes, every kid should get it and every kid will get it. Now, as regards your question about Pfizer versus Covaxin, um, Co Covaxin's license, when it gets licensed, it's going to be licensed above the age of 2. There is no other vaccine in the world that's licensed above the age of 2. The Pfizer went on from 15 to 18, then 15 to 11, then 11 to 5. Less than 5, I don't think they've submitted their phase 3 data to the FDA for approval. So you actually have a vaccine and we'll be able to make tons of it. We're already making tons of it. So having a supply of vaccine is not going to be an issue with Covaxin. Now, another question that used to keep coming up. I want a vaccine that has been approved by WHO, because if I want to travel, I know as of now, nobody bothers about vaccination in children, but there will come a time next year when they'll ask for a vaccination certificate for kids as well. And well, Covaxin now is approved by WHO. So, if you're on a WHO approved vaccine list, then, you will get through into the country that asks you for a vaccine certificate for children. So I feel that, the availability of Covaxin once the approval comes is really going to be very, very, a very positive development. And I think it's going to encourage parents, to go and get their kids vaccinated. Now, coming to Pfizer, it's really up to Pfizer. The Pfizer is inundated with requests, and Pfizer has to look at their capacity. They have to look at which countries they want to provide. It's also about price points. So the good news is that, we have enough vaccines between Covishield and Covaxin, and we also have the Zydus vaccine, and we do have Sputnik, and there are another 3 on their way. So availability of vaccines no longer a challenge. It's just a question of giving it more to those who are at risk, which are the adults, and then moving on to kids with comorbid conditions, and then moving on to healthy kids.
So there was a question here, someone's asking, and I've seen this a lot, many cases that I personally know of people who, trying to take the children abroad and get them vaccinated. So there's a question asking, can she get her 7-year-old vaccinated with Moderna in the US? Is it safe? What's your
Um, Pfizer is licensed at 7. I will have to check if Moderna is licensed for a 7-year-old. They're very similar vaccines, the two of them. Yes, if you want to get vaccinated before the vaccine becomes available in India, yes, you do have the option of going abroad. The vaccine for healthy kids is going to take a bit of time, like we just discussed. It will roll over into 2022.
So, forget what is available in India for a minute, Doc. Uh, would you think that it's okay for children to be given the mRNA?
There's enough data. And again, I want to go back and look at this point that has been bothering people. You know, did we rush in with vaccination? Did the approvals come through very quickly? Were the trials robust enough? Did they have time to study everything? So let's go back to, say, the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine. Look at the chickenpox vaccine.
Yeah, the measles.
If you look at the data, if you look at the size of the trial, they were way smaller than any of the COVID trials. Each of these trials has been around 30,000. Pfizer, Moderna, Covishield, Covaxin, and 30,000 is very reasonable. Now, if you want to ask me this question about, what happens when a vaccine is given long term. Now, we have to be realistic. I mean, there is no long-term data available. How can there be long-term available when we didn't even know
It's
about
true.
this virus more than, we just got to know about it in December 19. So how would we have long-term data about protection and side effects? But based on what we see real time, um, these vaccines are safe, whether it's the mRNA or whether it's the killed vaccine, as in Covaxin, or the other different types, where we have Covishield, Sputnik. They seem to be safe vaccines based on the trial data that has been submitted to authorities across the world. And of course, WHO has a very rigorous process to evaluate. Now, also might want to add here EMA, which is the EUA, sorry, Emergency Use Authorization, which is the term that all of us have become
Mm.
familiar with, had never been accorded to a vaccine ever. It was for medication. So this is for the first time the WHO has given EUA one after the other to several vaccines, because it was a need, a felt need globally. So there is much that we are learning about vaccination, much that we are learning about medication. We see medication come in, become very popular, then data suggests that it's not as good as we thought, so it goes out. So there is obviously a lot of learning that is needed. But one thing that I have to say, and that as a doctor, and I've been a doctor now for a while. I graduated in 90. The kind of pace, the kind of progress that we see, we have never seen before. I mean, the fact that we were able to unravel the genome of this SARS-CoV-2 virus in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks, trials started for medication. Several different diagnostic tests became available. We had medication in a few months, and we had a vaccine that was being studied a few months later, and we had a vaccine that was rolled out in record time. And not one, but multiple vaccines were rolled out. And I think this has changed the way we think. It has changed the practice of medicine, and we are going to have amazing developments in vaccinology. Imagine we don't have a vaccine against malaria. We don't have a vaccine against dengue. We don't have a vaccine against HIV. We don't have a vaccine against hepatitis C. Now suddenly the thinking has changed. The silos have broken. We are able to collaborate more than ever before. And so we're going to see a lot of spin-offs. And I think that is very positive for humanity as a whole, in that we will find solutions like we didn't in the past.
No, absolutely. I think, and I think it's been remarkable the time that was not taken to get these vaccines out and to come out with the whole mRNA, which is, of course, a way into our future lives as well. Just quickly going back to Omicron for a minute, Doc. With the information that is filtering out at the moment, do you have any sense of this kind of symptoms that people could look out for?
The symptoms I don't think seem to be very different, and all of us have seen WhatsApps floating around. I don't know how many of those were authentic, but definitely the medical community, the president of the South African Medical Association commented that what they are seeing is a mild disease. Now, I think that is music to all of us. Sure, it might be more infectious, but if it's mild disease and it produces a little bit of fever and a cough or nothing, then wow, that's what we want to hear. So let's hold our horses. Let's give it a couple of weeks. We'll have a lot more information, and I'd urge everyone to please only depend on authentic sources of information. I think one should, for those who are very interested, look at the WHO bulletins that come out, because they have a very good network across the globe, including Africa, and they will have credible information on what's happening. I wish we could look at WhatsApps, and I think WhatsApp's great in terms of getting information as long as it's accurate information, because it does tend to spread panic. So I want to tell everyone, please don't panic. Sure, it's disappointing to hear about a mutation. I mean, about a variant that has 50 plus mutations and has 32 in the spike region. And I think we're all so concerned about the spike region because, that's how the binding happens. That's where the vaccine attacks. That's where the antibody is supposed to act. Treatment has revolved around the spike protein. So if there are 32 odd mutations there, this is a super smart virus. But let's see what happens. Maybe this super smart virus is too smart for its own survival. And maybe too many mutations cause it to self-destruct. We don't know. We will get to know over a period of time. So let's keep our eyes open. Let's look at what WHO says, and let's be cautious. I am saying that over and over again. Please don't let your guard down. Please mask up. Please use the sanitizer. Please wash your hands. Maintain distancing. And of course, if you haven't had the vaccine, please go get it tomorrow.
Yes, I was going to ask you that. I mean, this is actually the cue for me to end the show, but there's just a couple of questions here.
Sure.
If you just have a minute, Doc.
No, I have the time.
Okay. One was on the boosters, which of course is a little bit, controversial in the sense that everyone has been talking about it and, looking at how the UK has spoken about the boosters immediately, and the world, the UAE has been giving the boosters. So where do we stand?
So I think there is no doubt that boosters will be needed, and I think we've been saying this for a while. And again, we're going to have to stratify. So I don't want to get into what different countries are doing, because a lot of countries did stuff that we haven't done in India, and thank God for that. At least you get penalized for not wearing masks. In many countries, wearing a mask was, oh, why do I need a mask kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, we went from one extreme in certain countries to the absolute other extreme. Whereas I think we've had the middle path where, of course, we do have people who don't mask up, but by and large, still, people did realize, even when the cases were really down, that there is the need to mask up. So coming to what we need, yes, we will need the booster. There's no doubt about that. And I think it will again have to be based on risks. So clearly, doctors, nurses, all those who are likely to get exposed, frontline workers, those with comorbidities will be the candidates to get the booster first. And then, of course, it will get on to the rest of the population. And I again want to highlight here, when vaccination started, not very many people believed that countries will insist on a vaccination certificate. Now, I don't know what the strategy will be, but it could very well be that certain countries say, show me a booster certificate. So it's extremely important to wait for your turn and then get the booster, because that certificate might be important. I'm not saying I don't have access to that information, but many people believed last year when at the start of the year when vaccination started, you won't need a certificate. I've got the shots, that's good enough. But we do realize that many countries insist on that certificate, so that might also even apply to boosters later.
So this, I think, accompanying question: 18-year-olds, do they need a booster?
Well, I think everybody will eventually need a booster. Absolutely, everybody will need a booster because this virus is going to be in circulation, and as long as it's in circulation, we need to have protection. And one way of protection, other than the COVID avoidance behavior, is going to be the vaccine. So, what happens with the flu? The vulnerable population, which is those above a particular age, those with some other coexisting conditions, take a flu jab every year. So, if this virus is going to float around, well, then we're going to need to enhance our protection. And for that, we're going to need boosters. But I also want to add this obsession that we have with antibody testing. Please remember, antibody testing is one way of testing the body's reaction to the vaccine. It is humoral immunity, which results in antibodies. But there's also something known as cell-mediated immunity that we cannot test in normal labs. So when you inject a vaccine, you get humoral immunity measurable by antibodies, you get cell-mediated immunity, which you can't measure. And also, even if your antibodies wane, we have the memory T cells and the memory B cells, and those get activated should there be exposure again with the virus. So, you went to school with someone in class 5 and you're meeting after 30 years. Well, suddenly, okay, all the memories come alive. So similarly, you've had the vaccine and the virus gets away into your environment and you get exposed. Your memory B and T cells will, hey, I want to mount an immune response because I recognize this virus. That cannot be measured. So let's not fixate on the antibodies and, oh my God, my antibodies have gone down. So what? Doesn't mean that you're not protected or you won't be protected in the future.
Do you think there'll be anything special in terms of testing for Omicron, or it's going to continue to be the same?
Well, I think there's some interest in that, it doesn't show up with the S spike. So if you have the other genes and not the S gene, then that might be suggestive of giving, of that individual having the new variant of concern. But I don't think there's going to be need for special kits to be designed, and the labs won't really have to rejig stuff. But should the need arise, the capability exists. And I think all the vaccine manufacturers have also said, if this virus turns around and turns out to be so radically different, then it's not going to be more than a few months before we develop a new vaccine, which is what happens every year with the flu. Every year it's done. Let me tell you, it's been going on for years. Every year we get a new vaccine.
Yes, I agree. Another, I think, a little anxious mother is wanting to know if a 5-year-old can go out and meet with friends in a small group. I think it's been really tough on the kids and to keep
Absolutely.
the kids at home, right? So,
absolutely. No, absolutely. I think the good thing about kids is that, in fact, the other day I had a kid who was going on pointing to his mother, your mask is coming down, your mask is coming down. A 5-year-old. And like, wow, this is a model 5-year-old here. So, kids at 5, 7 are okay to wear a mask because they understand, and you have these really interesting masks with lots of characters, so on and so forth. So wear a mask and go out. Within a selected group, you have to get out. Of course, in Delhi, we have a problem now that if you have reactive airway disease, we say don't go out because the air quality index is crazy.
What to do? It's the devil in the deep sea right now, Doc. But thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute my pleasure always to listen to you, and a very informative session as well. And thanks for very patiently answering all the questions. We'll be back with you again soon, I'm sure, in a couple of weeks when there's more clarity. And hopefully it's not as bad as we think or we're panicking about. And well, like you said, the virus has to self-destruct at some point, doesn't it?
So till we meet again, don't panic.
No panicking. Thank you, and please
bless.
vaccinate everybody. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. And
Bye-bye.
Everybody else, thank you for joining us on Table Talk. The recording will be available on my YouTube channel, Jyotsna Mohan, very shortly, as well as on IGTV. Till then, be safe, wear a mask, and vaccinate. Goodbye, good night. Thank you, Doc.